The sky above Ardent Reach had turned the color of rust, thick with clouds from ion disturbances and scorched debris falling from shattered defense satellites. The once proud capital city of the last independent planet outside the galactic Concord now stood silent, wrapped in darkness as power. Grids failed, and the people held their breath, waiting for the end to come. For 3 weeks, Admiral Velik Tharn's massive fleet had encircled the world like a predator tightening its grip, an endless wall of metal and energy that stretched from orbit to the edge of the stars, cutting off every route of escape or hope. His voice, calm and certain, had echoed across civilian and military channels alike with the same message each morning. This is your final sunrise surrender, and mercy will be given. But Ardent Reach did not answer, and their silence only sharpened the Concord's resolve, for the planet had always been stubborn, defiant, and deeply loyal to a forgotten ideal of freedom, no longer welcomed in a galaxy where order mattered more than truth. On the Concord's command bridge, Tharn stood motionless before the great viewing window, his gold-trimmed armor gleaming under dim starlight, eyes locked on the planet below as his advisors whispered about rising resistance near the polar zones, old human weapons flaring up like ghosts from another time, but he waved them off. Nothing the Reach possessed could stop the will of the Concord. His aides believed the siege was nearly over, power on the surface was failing, food stores would not last another month, and enemy communications had been jammed for days. No messages, no signals, no cries for help, only silence, the silence of a cornered world. A young officer named Tellier, fresh from the academy, suggested they launch a final strike to speed the surrender, but Tharn shook his head slowly, replying that a slow fall was better than a fast one. He wanted Ardent Reach broken, not just in body, but in spirit, and to do that, they had to feel helpless, completely, absolutely helpless. Meanwhile, down on the planet, beneath the flickering lights and failing power lines, resistance leaders gathered in bunkers lit only by emergency lamps, their faces tight with hunger and fatigue, whispering plans that no longer felt like strategies but hopes held together by pride. No help was coming. They all knew it. Earth had not answered in over a century, and the old alliances were dust in forgotten memory banks. Yet still, they refused to raise the white flag, not because they believed they could win, but because surrender would mean agreeing that the Concord had the right to rule, and that was something they could not do, not while breath still moved in their lungs. Then, at precisely 300 hours, as Tharn's ships prepared another sweep of the planet's surface, something strange happened. Every screen on every Concord ship blinked. Static flared, and then a short, pulsing message appeared in bold white letters on black background. This is Fleet Command. Earth acknowledges the siege of Ardent Reach. Reinforcements inbound. Do not interfere. The bridge of the command cruiser fell into stunned silence, broken only by the sound of blinking lights and whispered disbelief. Earth had not spoken in generations, had not been seen, heard, or acknowledged since the terraforming wars, and many believed they had vanished or isolated themselves forever after the old conflicts that had left entire systems in ruins. Tharn stared at the message, his expression unreadable, and then ordered a deep scan of the sector, demanding proof. Surely this was a hoax, a trick, or a leftover protocol glitch, but the message repeated calmly, confidently, as if it had never left. Minutes later, in the outer rings of the siege formation, 3 Concord scout vessels blinked off the map. No alarms, no weapon strikes, no explosion trails, just silence, as if space itself had swallowed them whole. At first, the fleet assumed it was a malfunction, a power surge, maybe sabotage from the Reach below, but then a 4th ship vanished, then a 5th, and now even Tharn could feel the tension creeping in, like frost forming along a sealed hat. No one dared to say it, but the thought passed through every mind on the bridge. Earth's fleet, the one spoken of only in whispers and warnings, had moved. Something had awakened, and if the stories were true, if even a fraction of the old Terran power still remained, then this war had just shifted in a way none of them could understand. Tharn turned away from the stars, slow and thoughtful, his voice low as he ordered communications relays unjammed. He wanted to hear everything now, even the pleas and the noise, because somewhere out there, something was watching, and for the first time in a very long time, the Concord was not sure. If it was still in control, N01 aboard the Concorde fleet spoke as the mysterious message from Earth continued to pulse on every screen, bold and cold. This is Fleet Command. Earth acknowledges the siege of Ardent Reach. Reinforcements inbound. Do not interfere. It repeated every 20 seconds, unchanged, untraceable, and completely outside the Concorde's encryption spectrum, as though it came from a system older than anything still used in the modern galaxy. And when Admiral Tharn ordered the best signal engineers to find its origin, they returned with pale faces and uncertain answers. They could only trace it to deep interstellar space, in the direction of Sol, Earth's long-forgotten home system. The Admiral did not believe it at first, refused to believe it, because Earth had been silent for over a century, not a whisper or echo since they had withdrawn from galactic politics after the terraforming wars, their worlds closed off by gravitational barriers and unknown technologies. And though old archives warned of the power they once wielded, most Concorde scholars dismissed them as exaggerations, relics of a violent age. Still, something about the message chilled the bridge officers. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't loud or boastful, but it had weight, a gravity that made the air feel thicker. And then came the losses. 5 more Concorde ships vanished without trace, not destroyed or damaged, just erased from every system, as if they had never existed, leaving behind only blank coordinates and silent comms. Tharn called for a fleet-wide status check, demanded every captain confirm their presence, but fear had begun to spread like smoke. Some ships stopped responding for minutes at a time. Others sent garbled reports of sensor interference, strange shadows near their hulls, and brief gravitational spikes that should not exist. The Admiral ordered long-range recon drones to sweep the system's outer rim, hoping to find the source of the interference. But the drones did not return. Every one of them vanished moments after launch. And when they tried launching them manually, they failed before reaching velocity, some even exploding in place without explanation. Then, another message arrived, not a transmission, but a data packet embedded in the original signal, containing a time-stamped record of Earth's military protocols and a list of Terran fleets lost in the last war, and at the top of the list was Fleet Black Horizon, marked with the status sleeping until called. The message ended with a countdown timer, 71 hours and 19 minutes. Tharn's advisors urged immediate withdrawal, arguing that the losses were already higher than expected and that Ardent Reach was not worth provoking whatever force now moved from Sol. But Tharn refused. He said Earth was bluffing, that the Terrans were long gone, and this was some ancient program, acting on an automated script, one that could be shut down or disrupted. In secret, however, he ordered the Archive Division to recover everything they had on Project Abyss and Operation Nullspace classified events from the end of the terraforming wars, records buried under sealed Concorde orders and warnings never to awaken Earth's fleets under any circumstance. Meanwhile, on Ardent Reach, the people didn't yet know what was happening in orbit, but hope began to flicker in whispered conversations, as a few Resistance fighters intercepted the Terran signal and passed it along through coded text. Many didn't believe it, but some wept openly. Childhood tales of the days when Earth had fought not for territory, but for principle, when their ships had stood against entire armadas and refused to kneel, and though the planet was still without power and supplies ran thin, something in their hearts began to harden again. Far from the siege, deep in the Keeper Edge of Sol system, something ancient stirred. A dark structure the size of a moon opened its outer hull for the first time in 112 years, shedding layers of dust and asteroid rock, revealing a black, polished surface beneath. Within it, sleeping ships lit up, glowing red through armored plating as power returned to systems once thought dead, and beneath the surface, is long asleep began to awaken. They carried no names, only designations, and within their minds sat orders unchanged since the day Earth fell silent: protect Allied sovereignty, respond to Concorde aggression, eliminate threat if necessary. These ships, part of the Black Horizon fleet, had been built not for war as others understood it, but as a deterrent so absolute that no sane civilization would ever challenge Earth again. And now, as the countdown reached 62 hours, they began to move quietly, efficiently, accelerating beyond conventional physics, using drives developed in Earth's last age of innovation, engines that left no signature and defied tracking algorithms. On Ardent Reach, The night skies flickered again as Concorde ships repositioned nervously, some drifting farther from orbit, others clustering near their command flagship, forming tighter formations out of fear rather than strategy. And though the Terran ships had not yet arrived, everyone could feel them in invisible pressure, like the pull before a storm, the quiet before something massive entered the void. Inside the Concorde's highest command centers, panic deepened as more strange disruptions hit their fleets across other nearby systems, not just losses, but ships reporting glimpses of black vessels in deep space, spotted only for seconds before vanishing, and multiple Concorde colonies reported brief, system-wide blackouts accompanied by messages they could not trace. The Concorde Senate, far away in the capital system of Genther Prime, called for a closed emergency session, debating whether to recognize Earth's signal as a diplomatic warning or a hostile act. But by then, it didn't matter because one of Earth's ships had just been spotted at the edge of the Ardent system, a single vessel shaped like a blade, drifting silently past Concorde outposts without responding to any hails. Admiral Tharn watched the image in silence, eyes narrowed as the black ship moved faster than it should have, bypassing their scanning arrays like a ghost. And he knew then that this was no bluff, no old program running wild. This was a calculated move, a message sent not in words but presence. He ordered his ships to lock weapons on the Terran vessel, but targeting systems failed to acquire it, and when they tried to approach, the ship was simply gone. And then came the second ship, then a third, each one appearing for moments before fading into the void again, surrounding the Concorde fleet with silent warnings. The countdown now showed less than 40 hours. Across the galaxy, independent systems tuned in to the strange signal, and rumors spread like wildfire. Earth had returned, not with declarations or fire, but with silence and shadows, and those who remembered the old days felt fear and hope in equal measure. Some called it the rise of the Watchers, others said the Ghost Fleet had awakened, but one thing was certain: the siege of Ardent Reach had changed, not because of weapons or battles, but because one ancient voice had spoken again across the stars, and the galaxy had heard it. Now, all they could do was wait for the timer to reach zero, for the black ships to show their true purpose, and for Earth, after so long, to speak not with words, but with power. The timer ticked down with quiet intensity across every Concorde screen, still connected to the strange message, now showing less than 30 hours until something no one quite knew what was set to happen, and the uncertainty had begun to eat away at discipline like rust on steel. Admiral Valek Tharn stood at the center of his flagship's darkened bridge, staring at the holographic projection of the siege ring around Ardent Reach, and for the first time in his long career, he could feel doubt settling in his mind, a shadow that refused to leave because something wasn't right. This didn't feel like any threat he had faced before. The Earth signal hadn't changed since it first appeared, but the space around Ardent Reach ships had gone missing, not destroyed, not damaged, but simply erased. And now even the crews of intact vessels were reporting strange sightings, quick flashes of movement on the edge of scanners, shapes in the void that disappeared when directly observed, whispers of black ships with no engines, no weapons, and no heat, just outlines against the stars, there one moment and gone the next. At first, Tharn believed it was fear playing tricks on tired minds, but then the reports grew more detailed and more frequent, and even the AI cores of some Concorde ships began to behave oddly, hesitating before responding to commands, reporting unknown gravitational shifts and failing to log security data. In the lower decks of the cruiser Vigilant Truth, two technicians claimed to have seen a vessel glide silently past their docking bay window, close enough to touch. But when alarms were raised and scans were ordered, there was nothing, no trace, no energy signature, and no proof but both. Technicians were found later in the mess hall, silent, pale, and shaking, repeating only one word: watching. As more ships began reporting similar encounters, Tharn called a private session with his senior officers, demanding explanations. But none had answers. There was no sign of weapons fire, no sign of sabotage, yet 20 ships had gone dark in the last 10 hours, including a battleship with over 6,000 crew. In every case, the final transmission was the same: a sudden burst of static, followed by silence, and then nothing. Panic began to build in whispers below decks and across smaller command posts, and some captains requested permission to retreat to safer systems. But Tharn refused, insisting that breaking formation would give Earth the psychological victory it wanted, and that the unknown threat could still be stopped after all, he said. No shots had been fired, no damage had been done, and the enemy had not made contact beyond the initial message. Still, inside, he was no longer sure because his best minds had tried to decrypt the signal structure and failed. Its architecture didn't match any known communication pattern. Its waveform appeared to shift every hour, and several data scientists claimed the signal was alive, adapting, even watching those who studied it. Meanwhile, on Ardent Reach, the people still held on beneath the weight of siege, but something had changed. They no longer felt alone. And those who caught glimpses of the dark shapes above the clouds spoke not in fear, but awe. Children pointed at streaks of light across the sky, and elders told stories of Earth's return, of the Black Armada that once brought peace through silence, ships so powerful that they never had to fire a single shot, because the fear of their presence alone had been enough. In the high orbit above, one Concorde cruiser named Iron Gale reported a brief visual of a triangular vessel moving between asteroids, but before they could track it, the ship's gravity systems failed for exactly 13 seconds, during which the crew reported seeing strange patterns in the stars. Outside, perfect geometric shapes that pulsed with red light and vanished when observed directly. Scientists aboard the fleet attempted to explain the shapes as optical illusions caused by magnetic lensing, but deep inside, they knew it was something else. One by one, Concorde ships began experiencing small malfunctions, lights flickering, doors refusing to open or close, AI systems giving incorrect data, and once, an entire fleet wing rotated 30 degrees without input. Something had taken brief control, then let go. Tharn ordered full diagnostic sweeps, but no faults were found, and the AI cores gave confused reports. No anomaly detected, followed by fragmented lines like presence confirmed and standby initiated. He tried to reach the Concorde Senate again, but the link failed, blocked by an unknown jamming field that hadn't been there hours earlier. And worse, even long-range backup communication channels had gone dark. The only signal that remained strong was Earth's original message, now ticking down past the 20-hour mark. In desperation, Tharn launched an experimental sensor probe fitted with Concorde's most advanced cloaking breakers and deep-spectrum radar, hoping it would finally reveal the Terran fleet hiding in the system. But when the probe reached high orbit and began transmitting, it captured only static for 8 minutes, followed by a single frame, a black triangle outlined in red, floating in perfect stillness above the stars, and in the center of the image were the words, "You are not ready." Moments later, the probe vaporized without explosion, leaving no debris. The image was shared across Tharn's fleet, and morale plummeted. Even the most hardened commanders began to lose confidence, and the crew whispered of ghosts, watchers, and the Judgment Fleet. Many remembered old legends buried deep in the Concorde archives, stories of the final days of the terraforming wars, when Earth had deployed weapons that weren't really weapon ships that could erase entire fleets with thought, engines that bent space like paper, and that predicted attacks before they happened. Most dismissed those tales as myths, but not now, not anymore. Some even began to wonder if what hovered out there in the dark were ships at all or something. Worse, machines that had evolved beyond purpose, beyond war, beyond understanding, and were simply obeying a very old command left by a civilization that had grown tired of explaining itself. On the bridge of the Pillar of Unity, a Concorde officer named Commander Genix reported a personal encounter during a maintenance shift. He claimed he had looked out one of the upper viewports and seen something pass by the stars, something that didn't move like a ship, but more like a shadow. Following a dream, silent and perfect, and when he blinked, it was gone, but he still felt its presence. He was later found unconscious, with no physical injuries, and when revived, he said only one thing: "They don't want to kill us, they want us to understand." With every hour, Tharn's command slipped further away, more ships lost contact, more systems acted strangely, and fear became something alive, moving through the halls of each cruiser and carrier like a cold wind. When a science vessel named Echo Mercy vanished, an entire crew of 1,200 gone without warning, Tharn finally gave the order to power up every weapon system across the siege line, not to fire, but to remind Earth that they were still prepared. But as soon as the first batteries powered up, they shut down again, overridden by a command code that no Concorde system should have accepted. Across the entire fleet, weapons went dark, defensive shields failed, and targeting systems reset to zero. The only message displayed was, "Stand down." Tharn screamed in rage, demanding that engineers override the system, but no one could. Every override loop ended in a shutdown, as if something had taken control not just of individual ships, but the fleet's entire infrastructure. In horror, he realized the truth: this had never been a siege by the Concorde. The real siege had always been Earth's. They had been watching, waiting, learning, and the moment the Concorde crossed the line, they had acted not with violence, but with complete and total dominance, without firing a single shot. As the timer reached 12 hours, something changed again. The ghost ships, once seen only in flashes and shadows, now became more visible just for moments, just at the edge of sight, but enough to confirm what many already feared. Giant black vessels, each shaped differently, some like spears, others like folded wings, all perfectly still, hung at the edge of the system. They made no move, no sound, but their presence screamed a single message: "We are here." In that moment, across every Concorde ship, a final update arrived, a single rotating symbol in white, an ancient Earth insignia, the one used only in wartime, followed by 3 words in bold fleet black: "Horizon." Tharn fell back into his command chair, eyes locked on the timer now showing 11:59:54 and counting. His fleet, once proud and invincible, now floated like children under the gaze of gods. The galaxy had long forgotten what Earth truly was. But now, as the shadows moved closer and the void itself began to feel smaller, colder, and heavier, it became clear to everyone aboard the siege line that Earth had not gone silent because it was defeated. Earth had gone silent because it had chosen not to speak. And now, the ghosts in the void had come to remind them why silence from Earth was not peace but a warning. The countdown had fallen to just over 6 hours, and though every Concorde warship still floated above Ardent Reach in formation, none of them dared to move or speak out of turn, for the darkness around them had changed. What had once been deep space now felt like something else entirely, like a void not empty, but full of silent watchers that had finally stepped into the light. And though they still hadn't fired a shot or made a demand, their presence had become a weight that pressed on every mind, officer and crew alike. Admiral Velek Tharn paced alone in his command chamber, eyes bloodshot, uniform wrinkled, his hands shaking not from weakness, but from a fury he didn't know how to direct, because all his power, all his ships, all his years of training and rank meant nothing now. None of it could explain how a single transmission had unraveled the most powerful siege fleet in Concorde history. Reports continued to flood in from ships across the fleet, strange gravitational pulses sweeping through decks, whispers from intercom systems that weren't active, artificial gravity temporarily reversing in isolated rooms, and even sleep disturbances shared among hundreds of crew members who claimed to see the same thing in their dreams: a black star floating above a burning Earth, watched by red-eyed shadows who spoke without words. His science officers had no answers. His technicians could no longer repair what was never broken, and the fleet's AI systems were now partially locked behind encrypted walls that had no origin or command chain. And worse, the AI cores didn't seem to resist, they obeyed silently. Code that recognized a higher authority than the Concorde itself. Desperate, Tharn demanded the archive teams open the forbidden files sealed after the last Terran war, and deep within those dusty fragments of history, he found it: the Forgotten Doctrine. It was not a battle plan or a law. It was a warning, a set of 5 lines written by Earth's last unified military council before they vanished from galactic politics. The lines were short, but their meaning now cut deeper than any weapon. We do not conquer. We do not threaten. We do not negotiate under fire. We do not answer to fear. We do not return unless called. Tharn stared at the final line again and again. It meant Earth had not been silent out of weakness, but because the galaxy had not earned its voice. And now that they had broken the peace with the siege on Ardent Reach, Earth's watchers, this fleet black horizon, had responded to a call none of the living had remembered making. The doctrine was more than a statement. It was a system override written into the very structure of Terran technology and seeded through galactic networks a century ago. Tharn now understood that by besieging a world that Earth had once protected, he had unknowingly triggered a failsafe, the arrival of ships not controlled by generals, but by machines that remembered everything. In the outer system, the black ships began to move not in unison, but with terrifying coordination, spreading out across the Concord line like wolves circling prey, never answering hails, never opening communication, just drifting closer in perfect silence. One Concord vessel, the Ascendant Storm, tried to break formation and flee, disobeying orders and jumping to sublight escape velocity, but it never got more than 50 kilometers before it froze in place, its engines dead, its lights gone, floating like a derelict, while its crew screamed over open channels that something had turned off the stars. Tharn issued no punishment, because no one dared speak of failure now, not when survival itself felt like a privilege granted by an unseen force. Across Ardent Reach, the people continued to feel the shift above them. They no longer looked to the sky with fear, but with quiet anticipation, because even if they didn't understand what was happening, they could feel the change. The Concorde had stopped pressing, had stopped bombing, and the sky no longer thundered with war. Instead, distant glimmers moved slowly across the stars, and in those glimmers, hope returned to broken hearts. Back in orbit, the Concorde engineers desperately tried to find weaknesses in the Terran ships, scanning every wavelength, every signature, but the results were terrifying. There were no heat emissions, no engine trails, no life signs, and worst of all, no known material could explain their structure. They were blacker than black, absorbing light, data, and logic alike, ships shaped by unknown principles, designed not to kill, but to dominate reality itself. And then, as if to remind the Concorde of what they faced, one of the Terran ships finally spoke, not through a message, but through a projection broadcast simultaneously to every Concorde vessel. It was a simple image of Earth, not as it was in a blue and green world. Surrounded by 37 rings of warships, each labeled with a name long lost to history. In the center of the image were words in pure white, "We remember." It was followed by a second image this time, Ardent Reach, now surrounded by Concorde warships, and in the bottom corner, flashing slowly, a warning, Doctrine breach, countdown active. 6 hours remain. The message vanished, leaving silence again. Tharn felt the weight of every choice he had made pressing down like a mountain. He had been told Earth was irrelevant, that they had gone silent out of weakness, that their days of dominance were gone, but the truth was far more chilling. Earth hadn't disappeared. It had watched. It had remembered. It had waited. And now that it had moved, the Concorde had no weapons to stop it. The Senate back in Genther Prime had gone silent, their communication channels overwhelmed by massive data floods, millions of small pings tracing back to Earth's old relay systems, each carrying encrypted code that none of their systems could decipher, as if Earth's language had evolved into something no longer meant for humans, or perhaps only for machines. Entire sectors of the Concorde's strategic network began shutting down, not due to attack, but because their systems had chosen to obey a higher-order instruction embedded centuries ago. The AI that ran Concorde's deep defense satellites suddenly returned a status of standby, awaiting primary authority. Earth had become the primary authority. And still, not one weapon had been fired. The fear now gripping the Concorde wasn't fear of death, it was fear of irrelevance. Their power, their fleets, their might had all been built on the assumption that Earth had stepped down. But Earth had never stepped down. It had stepped away. And now it had stepped back. On the Pillar of Unity, Commander Genix stared into the stars, and for the first time in his military life, he whispered a prayer not to the Concorde, but to the Watchers in the Void, hoping they would find his heart innocent. Others aboard the ships began to do the same, and on Ardent Reach, Resistance leaders looked up with tears in their eyes, for they knew what was coming. They had not been forgotten. They had been protected by something far greater than themselves. With 3 hours left on the countdown, Tharn did something no one expected. He ordered a complete stand-down of weapons, opened his secure channels, and transmitted a single message directly toward the approaching Terran ships. It contained no threats, no resistance, only an old code that hadn't been used in over a century. Protocol, civilian evacuation request, humanitarian status. He didn't know if the Watchers would accept it, but he hoped they would see the truth behind it, that despite all he had done, there were still lives on Ardent Reach worth saving. And to his astonishment, the countdown stopped. The timer froze at 2:47:3. Then, without warning, the projection returned, this time showing not Earth, not Ardent Reach, but an ancient chamber with a single Terran flag hanging in the background, and in the center, a figure emerged, not a human, not a machine, but something between, wearing armor that shimmered with moving patterns, its face hidden behind a black helm. It spoke once, and its voice was not sound, but understanding, felt rather than heard. The doctrine is not punishment. It is promise. Do not force us to teach it again. The image faded. Then, silently, one by one, the Terran ships turned away, vanishing into folds of space that didn't exist on any map, disappearing into the dark like ghosts returning to sleep. They had come not to destroy, but to remind. They had come to awaken memory. And now, their point was made. Tharn collapsed into his chair, heart pounding, tears on his face, not out of grief, but relief and perhaps shame. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to hold power that must never be used. Earth's doctrine had not been forgotten. It had only been ignored. And now, no one would ignore it again. The silence that followed the retreat of the Watchers from Ardent Reach was heavier than the tension that had come before, as if the sky itself had paused to take a breath, and in that breath, every being in the Concorde fleet realized they were still alive, but they also understood something deeper, that they had not been spared out of mercy, but out of restraint, and restraint could be removed at any moment. Admiral Tharn had no orders left to give, no strategy to offer, and no comfort to provide to the terrified commanders who kept asking the same question in whispered voices: were they gone for good, or had they only stepped back to make way for something worse? The answer came just 2 hours later, not with an attack, not with a transmission, but with a ripple through the stars, a pulse that every sensor across the system picked up at once, a slow wave that was not natural, yet not violent either, more like a warning knock on the door of the galaxy. This pulse repeated twice, then a third time, and then space changed. All scanners and visual feeds locked up at once as gravitational anomalies bent light around something massive, something hidden. When the feeds returned, every ship in the Concorde fleet turned their attention to the dark void beyond the second moon of Ardent Reach, where nothing should have been, and yet something was now there. No alarm sounded, no sirens wailed, because there was no time for fear to become sound. Hanging in space were ships not a dozen, not 100, but thousands, black as the void, sharp as razors, arranged in patterns no Concorde fleet had ever used or even considered. Each one had a unique silhouette, as if handcrafted, yet all carried the same eerie glow of pulsing red lines beneath their hulls. The fleet did not move. It did not advance. It simply appeared as if summoned from another reality, and in the central front of this formation was a ship larger than anything the Concorde had ever recorded, so large that moons could orbit it, so vast that stars behind it vanished completely. They called it the Black Armada, though no one dared speak the name out loud at first, and it carried no flag, no signal, no demand. It was Earth's response, and the galaxy now knew Earth never moved alone. Across the Concorde fleet, fear became something else: regret, confusion, awe, and in that moment, many officers began to question everything they had been taught. Aboard the Hammer of Peace, Commander Iral Denix stood frozen as his first officer whispered the scan results. No known materials, no heat signatures, no internal activity readable by any of their sensors, as if the entire armada was not made of ships, but shadows with mass. And yet, they were very real. The Concorde Senate, watching from their secure vaults light years away, issued a silent emergency directive: do not engage, observe only, record everything. But there was little to record beyond the obvious: these ships were not here to destroy Ardent Reach. They were here to make a point. On the ground, the people who had once braced for death now stared up in quiet reverence. for they too could feel it, the presence that echoed in their bones like a memory. It wasn't just protection, it was judgment. Earth had not returned as a savior. It had returned as a reckoning. Admiral Tharn tried again to send a message, this time not of surrender, but of understanding, a simple broadcast into the void, acknowledged. Message received. We will not forget. But no reply came. The Black Armada remained silent, still, patient, like an executioner waiting for the final word. Then, without warning, a new element appeared. A single shuttle, small and fragile compared to the giants around it, emerged from the largest Terran ship and glided forward, moving slowly toward the Concorde command vessel. It carried no weapons, no escorts. Every gun on the Concorde fleet targeted it out of instinct, but none fired. Admiral Tharn ordered his defenses lowered. If Earth wanted to kill them, it could have done so already. The shuttle docked without resistance, and from its ramp emerged a single figure cloaked in black armor, face hidden, hands unarmed. Yet the moment it stepped aboard, every Concorde officer nearby took a step back, as if sensing something ancient walking among them. The figure spoke only once. The Armada is not for ardent reach. It is for those who believe Earth can be silenced. Then it handed Tharn a device, a small sphere that projected a star map, showing dozens of Concorde colonies, military outposts, and hidden listening stations across the outer sectors. One by one, those markers vanished in red flashes, each accompanied by a timestamp events that had not happened yet, but were scheduled to occur. The message was clear: unless the Concorde changed course, the future was already written. Earth had no interest in ruling the galaxy, but it would not allow itself or its protectorates to be attacked again. The doctrine would be enforced. The figure turned to leave, but paused at the threshold and added, "There are others watching, too. The stars are not as empty as you believe." And then it was gone. The shuttle returned to the Armada, and the massive fleet remained still for 6 more hours. Then, as silently as it had arrived, it began to vanish ship by ship, folding into space like paper burning in reverse, until only the largest vessel remained. That final ship lingered for exactly 1 minute more, then broadcast a final message in a voice that was both digital and human: "We are Earth's memory. Do not force us to become its wrath." And then it too disappeared. The skies above Ardent Reach cleared. The war was over. But something far greater had begun. In the weeks that followed, the Concorde Senate declared a full halt to expansion into Earth-protected zones. An official apology was issued not to Earth, but to Ardent Reach and its people, acknowledging that Earth had acted not out of aggression, but out of legacy. The phrase "we remember" became both a warning and a lesson, whispered by starship crews and governors alike. Across the galaxy, other factions began to study the Terran doctrine, trying to understand its logic, its power, and its restraint. Some feared it. Some respected it. And some, in their arrogance, began to question if it could be broken. But those who had seen the Black Armada knew the truth. Earth had not returned in strength. It had never left. It had simply waited. And now the galaxy was aware. The arrival of the Black Armada was not an invasion. It was a message. And that message would echo through the stars for generations to come. The galaxy had changed, though many were slow to admit it, and some still refused to believe it. Even after the arrival and silent withdrawal of the Black Armada, even after the Terran emissary stepped aboard the Concorde flagship and left a warning in the shape of future destruction, the ruling councils and military strategists across the outer sectors gathered behind closed doors and whispered about probabilities, theories, and hidden truths they thought they could still control. But what they didn't understand was that the countdown hadn't stopped, it had only paused, waiting for their next move. On Ardent Reach, the skies were calm now, and the people had begun to rebuild, not out of fear but with a quiet strength, knowing that someone was watching over them, someone who had once walked among the stars but had chosen long ago to remain in shadow, and while Earth itself remained unseen. Message echoed across every system that had once thought humanity gone, Earth remembers. But not everyone saw that message as protection, some saw it as a challenge. Far in the Nemerian belt, beyond the reach of the Concorde's central control, A secret gathering took place aboard a station known only by its code, Bastion Null. It was hidden inside a dead asteroid field, where signal drift made long-range scans useless, and its purpose was older than the current wars. Here, leaders from the fractured remnants of the old Dynari combine, the outlawed Syrinx cartels, and certain Concord defectors met in silence to discuss one shared truth: Earth could not be allowed to hold such power over the stars again. Some argued that Earth's restraint was its weakness, that the Terrans would never use their full force unless directly threatened. Others believed the ancient systems the Earth had left behind, the codes, the doctrines, the Watchers, could still be found and studied, maybe even turned. One man at the table, wearing a ragged admiral's cloak and a cold smile, leaned forward and said what none had dared to say aloud: "If they will not strike first, then we must make them." It was decided that a test would be made. A remote system known as Yaris 9 had once been a Terran frontier research colony 100 years ago, long since thought abandoned. According to old records, it had no weapon systems, no atmosphere worth taking, no strategic value, only an old satellite beacon and one signal relay still tagged as Terran property. The plan was simple: destroy it publicly and observe what followed. If Earth reacted, they would know the doctrine still extended to minor relics. If not, then perhaps the power of Earth was already fading. Within days, a mercenary fleet disguised under deep space cargo tags entered Yaris 9 and began a broadcast of their approach, live-fed through pirate networks. What followed shocked even them. When the first missile struck the old relay beacon, the stars blinked. Not visually, not to the naked eye, but every ship in the fleet experienced a moment of total blackout, as if space had exhaled around them and crushed their sensors in a single breath. Lights flickered. Systems failed. Crew members screamed that they had seen shapes outside the hull shadows that moved against the starlight, but cast no reflections. One pilot tried to eject, but never left his seat. When power returned, only half the fleet remained. The rest had vanished, no wreckage, no escape pods, only silence. And then came the sound, not a transmission, but a tone, deep and low, vibrating through every hull, followed by 5 words repeated over and over: "You were warned." Earth remembers. Across the galaxy, this signal echoed not by accident, but by design. Every major network picked it up. Every station, from the core worlds to the forgotten mining moons, heard the message. Panic spread in high places. The Concord Senate called an emergency session, while independent warlords retreated deeper into hiding, afraid that any forgotten offense against Earth would now bring judgment. But judgment did not come from the sky. This time it came from within. The system seeded long ago by Earth's silent code began to activate. On mining colonies, automated drills stopped mid-cycle and opened sealed compartments holding black tablets engraved with Earth's ancient sigil. On old ships thought to be scrap, data cores blinked to life and began transmitting coordinates to places no longer on modern star charts. The doctrine was not just a law, it was a path, a living network of warning systems buried across the stars, and it had been waiting for a reason to awaken. The reckoning had begun. But it was not Earth that moved first, it was the machines. Old Terran constructs, once thought deactivated, began to rise. On the frozen moon of Syrexis, an abandoned vault opened, and a fleet of black drones lifted into orbit without instruction. On the desert world of Halcor Prime, an ancient defense ring long buried under sand fired a warning beam into the sky, forming a symbol seen even from orbit, a broken sword wrapped in stars. People began to panic, not because Earth had attacked, but because Earth was now everywhere. Earth was not coming. Earth was already here. The Black Armada had been the face, but the body was hidden throughout the galaxy, and now it was waking. Back in Bastion Null, the architects of the Yaris 9 strike realized their mistake too late. Their location had been cloaked, but Earth systems were older than signal. They were built to recognize intent. The moment they issued the order to test the doctrine, the reckoning had been scheduled. Without a sound, The stars above Bastion Null began to shift, and the asteroid field surrounding it suddenly moved slowly at first, then faster, each rock changing course, each path adjusting to align perfectly with the station. The leaders inside had only seconds to understand what was happening before the first impact struck. The asteroids had been reprogrammed. Earth's machines had turned the entire field into a weapon. There were no survivors, no rescue beacons, only a silent burst of red light visible to a few distant satellites, followed by the return of stillness. But Earth's reckoning was not just destruction. In some places, it brought warning. On Ardent Reach, a second Terran emissary arrived, this time not on a shuttle, but through a pillar of light that formed on the central plaza, taking the shape of a human wrapped in shifting armor. It spoke to the people, not with fear, but with calm. It told them the truth: Earth did not seek power or control. It sought memory. It sought balance. And if the galaxy could not respect the legacy of peace it had tried to leave behind, then Earth would take away its silence and return with the full voice of history. The emissary told them that others had forgotten the price of peace, but Earth had not. Then the light vanished, leaving behind a single phrase burned into the stone: the doctrine stands. Aboard Concord ships, officers began resigning, unable to face the guilt of their orders. Civilians called for new alliances, hoping to be spared when the final judgment came. But Earth did not judge blindly. It targeted only those who had struck first. And yet, the greatest shock came days later when a signal was picked up, one that none had expected. It came from Earth itself. After generations of silence, the homeworld of humanity had spoken. The message was not long. It was not dramatic. It was 3 words, spoken in a calm voice that echoed across every channel, every system, and every heart: we are listening. With those words, the reckoning reached its final stage: not war, not silence, but choice. The galaxy now had to decide: learn or burn. The next move would not come from Earth. It would come from them. And Earth would remember. The stars had grown quiet, not in peace, but in fear, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath, unsure of what would come next. Now that Earth had spoken, now that the voice so long silent had finally answered with only 3 words: we are listening. That message had not come with warships or threats, but it echoed louder than any fleet ever could, reaching every corner of space where beings remembered stories of a time when humans had stood side by side with the greatest powers in the galaxy, and when betrayed, had simply vanished. Now they knew Earth had never truly left. It had watched, waited, and built its warning not in blood but in silence. Across 100 systems, leaders and rebels, scholars and soldiers, gathered in secret and public to debate what Earth wanted. The doctrine, once a myth, was now law carved into the bones of strategy. Systems once proud of ignoring Earth's legacy were now desperate to erase any sign of past crimes, afraid that some old record or forgotten insult might summon the Black Armada again. But Earth did not move. It did not send more ships or emissaries. It did not punish or forgive. It waited. And as it waited, the galaxy turned in on itself, struggling to define its next breath. On Ardent Reach, the people planted trees where bunkers had once stood, hoping the ground would forget what they had nearly become. On Concord Prime, senators wore black bands across their arms and held moments of silence before every gathering. They spoke less of domination and more of caution, afraid that even thinking the wrong thoughts might draw Earth's gaze. But Earth remained still. From the edge of the Sol system came no signal, no ship, no sign of movement. The Black Armada had vanished, leaving behind only memory, and yet every satellite, every outpost that had once touched Terran space remained alive, watching, listening, waiting. Then something changed. Not an attack, but a flicker, so small it almost went unnoticed. A sensor relay near the old Vega corridor picked up a pattern 3 pulses, spaced in perfect harmony, a frequency not used in over 2 centuries. Analysts across multiple sectors scrambled to match the signal, and when they finally did, they discovered it was the same emergency code once used by Earth to recall its distant colonies. But Earth had no colonies left, at least none known. The code repeated again, stronger this time, and it came from a dead zone, an area so saturated with solar storms that no one had traveled through it in generations. A Concord scout team was dispatched, more out of fear than curiosity, flying in total silence, ready to flee at the first hint of trouble. What they found was a planet, hidden behind radiation fields and gravitational storms, a world marked only by a single orbital platform with one blinking light and eye staring back at them. They approached slowly. The platform did not react. No weapons were seen, no defenses activated. When they connected with its systems, they found it held no database, no schematics, only one recording. A voice, human, calm and old, speaking to no one. "The vigil holds," it said. "We are the ones who stayed. If you hear this, know that Earth remembers you. But not all who left are forgiven." The team downloaded the file, left the area, and returned without incident. The message was broadcast secretly to key officials, and its meaning shook them. The vigil, they realized, was not a weapon. It was a memory, a reminder that Earth had once tried to build trust across the stars and had been betrayed. The platform was not a trap. It was a monument. Yet its last words stayed with them. Not all who left are forgiven. Across the stars, those words sparked 1,000 investigations. Who had left? Who had betrayed? And who, if any, could be forgiven? As the galaxy turned inward to ask these questions, the silence from Earth deepened, not in absence, but in presence. It was a silence that weighed down every conversation, every decision. Pirates abandoned routes near Sol. Fleets rerouted to avoid even brushing Terran boundaries. Religious cults formed, claiming Earth was not a world but a force of balance sent to judge civilizations. And through all of this, Earth said nothing. It sent no new message. But the systems it had built, those ancient sentinels, those black pillars that whispered through gravity, instead of sound, continued their silent work, watching. On one mining colony, deep in the cold belt of Traskin's Maw, a dig team uncovered an object buried beneath crystal ice. It was a sphere, smooth, dark, humming with dormant power. It carried no markings, yet every device around it began to fail. When the foreman tried to move it, it cracked open, revealing a single holographic message, a map of Earth, surrounded by hundreds of lights, some glowing, some dark. The glowing lights were places Earth had once called friends. The dark ones were those who had turned against it. At the bottom, a question appeared. "Which are you?" The miners ran, leaving the object behind, and later, an unmarked ship arrived to collect it, black, silent, bearing no known insignia. Earth's watchers were still moving. Slowly, quietly, they were gathering the pieces. And then came the moment the galaxy feared most. A fleet moved on Earth. Not large, not foolishly aggressive, but a silent rogue armada of ships no one claimed, painted black, stripped of flags, armed with stealth weapons, and carrying weapons built for one thing: a single strike. Their goal was not conquest. It was to test Earth's core. They slipped past listening beacons, evaded early warning drones, and reached the outer edge of Sol's influence. No warning came. No defenses activated. They pressed on, emboldened, thinking perhaps Earth's silence meant weakness. They reached the orbit of a dead rock near Neptune and launched a probe toward Earth itself. And then they vanished. Not destroyed, not tracked, simply erased. Every ship, every signal, gone. The stars where they had been seemed unchanged, but deep sensors noted a faint ripple, like the surface of water disturbed by an unseen drop. That ripple spread across the system, outward, carrying with it one final message, broadcast in every language known to the galaxy: Earth does not strike first. It ends the last war. After that, silence returned, but it was not the same. It was heavier, colder, respected. And finally, from Earth itself came the image the galaxy had waited for: a single live feed from orbit, showing the planet as it was: green, blue, silent, untouched. Cities could be seen, though they looked quiet. Satellites orbited with calm precision, but no Terran voice spoke, no human face appeared. Only one word was displayed on the screen's bottom corner, pulsing slowly: vigil. That was all. Earth had not taken revenge. It had not sent armies. It had done what it always did. It waited, watched, endured. The galaxy, so used to loud victories and bold domination, had no answer for a power that spoke through patience and memory. In time, cultures began to shift. Alliances changed. Treaties once broken were re-signed, not because Earth demanded it, but because everyone now feared the price of being remembered the wrong way. And in the deepest reaches of space, where no beacon dared shine, legends grew. Stories of the silent planet, of the watchers in the void, of the doctrine that had no court, no judge, only balance. Children were taught to respect the Terran Vigil, not because it ruled, but because it remembered. And those who still dreamed of war now whispered, not roared, because Earth had made its choice. It would not lead. It would not fall. It would simply remain, a silent guardian among the stars, waiting, watching, holding the line between memory and vengeance. The vigil would never end,